In a world where darkness often hides in silence, one soul dared to speak the truth that many feared to confront. This is the story of a young woman whose encounter with the unseen changed her life forever. A moment when faith collided with the supernatural, when the veil between the living and the spirit world lifted for just a heartbeat. Her voice trembled, her heart pounded. Yet what she witnessed would ignite a message meant for every believer searching for hope, courage, and divine protection. This is not just a story. It is a reminder that heaven and the unseen realms are closer than we imagine. For 1 full hour, a single hour measured in earthly time, but experienced as something far beyond human comprehension, she was in hell, not observing it from afar, not receiving a symbolic vision from a comfortable distance, not witnessing the flames as an outsider looking down. No, she was inside it, immersed completely, experiencing what the condemned experience, feeling what they feel, seeing what they see, knowing what they know. 1 hour, 60 minutes, but each minute stretched into an eternity of horror so deep and so absolute that when she returned to her body, she was never the same person again. And when she finally gathered the strength to write about that hour, her testimony became one of the most terrifying, vivid, and theologically precise descriptions of hell in all of Christian literature. It came not from imagination, not from speculation, but from direct experience, one granted by God for reasons she herself would only later begin to understand. This woman was Teresa of Avila, Spain's great mystic, reformer, and doctor of the Church. Born in 1515 to a family of converso ancestry, Teresa entered the Carmelite monastery of the Incarnation in Avila at the age of 20. But her early years in religious life were not marked by extraordinary holiness. In fact, she lived what she would one day describe with painful honesty as lukewarmness, a spiritual mediocrity disguised behind external religious appearance. The monastery at that time had relaxed its discipline. Visits in the parlor were frequent. Friendships, sometimes excessively worldly, were common. Comfort was easy to find. Many women entered without the burning desire for holiness that had characterized the early Carmelites. Teresa, gifted, charming, intelligent, and admired, found herself drifting in this environment. She was a nun, yes, but she was not yet a saint. All of that changed in 1554 when she was 39 years old, while praying before a statue of Christ scourged at the pillar, his body wounded, his head crowned with thorns. Teresa underwent a profound interior conversion. Something shattered inside her, her complacency, her illusions, her excuses. From that moment, she belonged completely to God. What followed is now legendary. Ecstatic visions, mystical union, the mysterious Transverberation in which an angel pierced her heart with a golden spear, and the deepening of her vocation to reform Carmel. But Teresa was not only a mystic, she became one of the most effective reformers in church history. She founded the Discalced Carmelites, restoring the order to its original purity, strict poverty, silence, enclosure, contemplative prayer. Despite relentless opposition from church officials, civic authorities, and even other religious, she established 17 convents across Spain. She wrote works that remain spiritual masterpieces: The Interior Castle, The Way of Perfection, and The Book of Life. In 1970, she was declared a Doctor of the Church, one of only 4 women ever to receive that title. So when Teresa of Ávila writes about hell, the Church listens. One of the reasons her testimony carries such weight is her personality. Teresa was not dreamy or superstitious. She was practical, sharp-witted, humorous, and astonishingly grounded. She would describe supernatural experiences with the same calm clarity a scientist might use to report the results of an experiment. She was not afraid to admit confusion, nor to express doubt, nor to question herself. Her honesty gives her writings an authenticity that few mystics possess. So when she tells the world what she saw in hell, her words have the ring of sober truth, not emotional exaggeration. The vision occurred during the early years of her reform, around 1560. Teresa herself explains in chapter 32 of the Book of Life why God showed her hell. The reasons are profound. First, God wanted her to understand what she personally had been saved from. For many years she had lived a compromised spiritual life, half given to God, half drawn to worldly friendship and comfort. She had convinced herself her sins were small, trivial, venial, harmless. God allowed her to experience hell so she could see the true weight of her choices and the reality of her own nothingness without His grace. It was an act of mercy, not cruelty. Seeing hell revealed to her the infinite value of Christ's salvation. Second, the vision ignited the fire that fueled her reforms. She suddenly understood how many souls were in danger, not just sinners in the world, but religious men and women who lived without zeal. She founded convents of greater rigor, not because she was afraid, but because she was overwhelmed with gratitude. She wanted to create places where souls could pursue God with purity and be saved from the fate she had witnessed. Third, God wanted her testimony for the world. Many Christians live as if hell does not exist, or as if it is only a metaphor, a symbol, a poetic image. Teresa had to be a witness. Her words had to echo through centuries. Hell is real. Hell is terrible. Hell is eternal. She was to become a voice crying out against complacency. Teresa did not seek this vision. She did not ask for it. She did not expect it. She was simply in prayer, probably in her cell, when it happened. There was no warning, no gradual unfolding. One moment she was in her body, the next she was not. She wrote, "It seemed to me I was transported there in an instant, without knowing how. The first thing she perceived was not fire, not screams, not demons, but space, or rather a strange distortion of it. She found herself in what felt like a narrow, suffocating corridor carved from rough stone, like the inside of a furnace or an oven. She said the passage was so tight she felt crushed from every side, pressed into confinement so unnatural it seemed impossible. And yet, at the same time, the space felt bottomless, like standing at the edge of an infinite abyss. There was no air, no movement, no sense of direction. It was a prison designed not only to confine the body, but to crush the soul. The floor beneath her was mud, thick, foul, alive with things she could not fully describe. Creatures that writhed, crawled and slithered, shapes that were not shapes, forms that existed only to horrify. But the darkness was the most terrifying of all. Not the absence of light, a presence, a thick, living darkness that suffocated the soul, that pressed into her mind, that made her forget light had ever existed. Darkness that mocked the memory of hope, truth, and love. Then she felt the fire. Teresa explains this with unusual precision. The fire of hell burns, but it gives no light. This is a paradox impossible on earth, but real in eternity. It was not physical fire that consumed her. She had no material body in the vision. It was a fire that burned the soul directly, penetrating every fiber of her spiritual being, shredding her interior faculties, filling her with pain that no earthly word could express. She had suffered physical illnesses, severe ones, throughout her life. She knew intense pain. But she wrote that nothing on earth, no matter how severe, could even be compared to the agony she experienced in hell. And yet even that was not the worst part. The worst suffering was interior. She wrote that the soul in hell sees itself entirely stripped of God, not only without Him, but aware that it will never have Him again. It feels itself being torn apart by regret, hatred, despair, rage, and self-loathing. It experiences guilt as fire, loneliness as suffocation, memory as torture. The soul is imprisoned within itself, unable to love, unable to hope, unable to die. And she said something chilling. All the tortures of the world are nothing compared to the agony of the soul that knows it is separated from God forever. The sensory torments were terrible. The spiritual torments were absolute. She saw that hell was not a place God sends a soul. It is a reality. The soul chooses through a lifetime of rejecting him. She wrote that after even a moment of experiencing that torment, the soul realizes with horrifying clarity, there will be no relief. Not in 1,000 years. Not in 1,000,000 years. Not ever. There is no countdown, no diminishing of suffering, no sense of progress. Teresa said the word always, the idea of perpetual existence in this state, was a torment greater than the fire itself. The soul longs for annihilation, longs to cease existing, but finds death impossible. For the damned, existence itself is the punishment. Third, the soul knows it is entirely its own fault. There is no blaming God, no blaming circumstances, no self-defense. In hell, the soul sees with perfect, excruciating clarity every choice it made, every rejection of grace, every excuse it clung to. It understands that God offered mercy again and again, more times than it can count, and that it refused. The soul recognizes, without distortion or self-deception, that it preferred other things over God, and that this preference is now fixed for eternity. This perfect understanding, Teresa said, becomes the deepest torment of all. She wrote with chilling precision. The soul torments itself. No one tortures it from outside. It itself is its own torture. Hell is not merely a place of external punishments. It is the soul's interior landscape revealed without masks, without restraint, without possibility of change. The soul becomes its own executioner. The guilt in hell is unbearable. But it is also useless, because guilt cannot lead to repentance. Repentance requires hope. Hope in God, hope in forgiveness, hope in change. And hope does not exist in hell. Without hope, guilt becomes an endless cycle of self-accusation, self-hatred and despair. Teresa understood that this interior agony, the soul's hatred for what it has become, is what fuels the torment far more than any demon or external fire. Although Teresa perceived the presence of other souls, she realized that each one existed in complete isolation. It was not a community of the damned. It was solitude multiplied to infinity. Every soul was alone, trapped within itself, incapable of receiving comfort, incapable of giving comfort, incapable of forming even the darkest form of companionship. Hell is the absolute opposite of heaven. Heaven is communion, union with God, with others, with creation, with oneself. Hell is total disconnection. The soul becomes a universe of suffering, closed upon itself. This isolation, Teresa wrote, was among the most agonizing realities she experienced. She said that the awareness of being cut off from every relationship, divine, human, even interior, caused a uniquely crushing despair. The soul cannot reach anyone. No cry is heard, no gesture is returned. Even hatred cannot truly connect one soul to another, because hatred requires the recognition of the other. And in hell, the soul is so absorbed in its own agony that it cannot see beyond itself. She saw that hell is the complete breakdown of love. And love is the structure of existence itself. When love is absent, everything collapses. The soul becomes a hollow echo chamber of torment, a closed chamber where no light can enter. Each soul is locked within its own eternal ruin. When the vision ended and Teresa returned to her body, her sisters found her collapsed, trembling, pale as ashes, barely able to speak. Her breath came in short, uneven gasps. Her hands were cold. Her eyes were wide with a horror that no one around her could understand. They thought she was dying. They tried to lift her, to steady her, to speak to her, but she could only shake, unable to form words. It seemed as though her soul was struggling to remember how to inhabit her body again. How long had she been gone? Perhaps an hour. It was difficult to measure, but for her, time inside the vision did not resemble earthly time. It felt endless, as though she had been there always, as though hell was her reality, and the world she returned to was the fading dream. When she finally found her voice, she uttered words her sisters would never forget. "I thank God for letting me see this." She explained that if she had to choose between all the sufferings possible in this world, illnesses, persecutions, betrayals, poverty, exhaustion, loneliness, and one single hour in that place, she would choose every earthly suffering 1,000 times rather than return to hell for even a moment. Earthly pain became trivial, light, meaningless compared to what she had endured. From that moment, fear left her. She no longer feared illness, though she suffered greatly. She no longer feared criticism, though she was slandered and opposed. She no longer feared failure, humiliation, or even death. Everything seemed small. Human cruelty, political pressure, ecclesiastical suspicion, none of it could intimidate her anymore. She had seen what true suffering was. The vision instantly, eminently transformed her. Before this experience, her life had been marked by a comfortable spiritual routine. Prayer mixed with distractions, piety diluted by social visits, religious duties mingled with worldly friendships. Afterward, her life became a burning flame of purpose. She began the work of founding what would become the Discalced Carmelites, a return to the ancient spirit of the order, marked by radical poverty, strict enclosure, continuous prayer, fasting, silence, and total dependence on God. She embraced hardships willingly, joyfully, seeing them now as small sacrifices compared to the eternal loss she had glimpsed. Teresa wrote, "If I lived 1,000 years, I could never forget that vision. It carved itself into her memory with such force that every time she saw someone living without fervor, serving God with lukewarmness or half-heartedness, she marveled that they did not tremble." She said that spiritual mediocrity, the quiet, comfortable drifting away from God, is far more dangerous than great dramatic sins, because it blinds the soul to its own peril. In 1562, just 2 years after her vision, she founded the first of her reformed convents, the convent of St. Joseph in Avila. It was a small poorhouse, no luxuries, no social distractions, no worldly comfort, just prayer, silence, and a burning desire for holiness. Her reform spread rapidly, despite fierce resistance from unreformed Carmelite houses, city officials, wealthy benefactors, and even inquisitors who were suspicious of her mystical experiences. She faced threats, accusations, interrogations, and constant obstacles, but nothing stopped her. The vision had given her absolute courage. She often said that after seeing hell, earthly opposition seemed laughable. What could anyone do to her that compared with what she had witnessed? She pressed forward with unwavering determination, establishing convent after convent, 17 in total, each one a beacon of spiritual renewal. At the command of her confessor, she wrote chapter 32 of her autobiography documenting the vision in detail. She wrote it in obedience, not from desire, but once she had written it, she expressed gratitude that it could serve others. She said she wished everyone could read it, because if people truly understood the danger of a lukewarm spiritual life, they would change the way they lived. Even centuries later, her account remains powerful, sobering, and deeply respected. The Church continues to teach her description of hell as trustworthy, coming from a woman known for her sanity, her balance, and her profound holiness. She was not prone to exaggeration. She was not hysterical. She was not naive. She was a doctor of the Church, a master of prayer, a spiritual genius, a woman whose mind was among the clearest and strongest in Christian history. Her message pierces through time. Spiritual mediocrity is deadly. One does not need to commit great dramatic sins to risk the loss of the soul. neglect, comfort, indifference, distraction. These, too, can destroy a soul slowly, quietly, unnoticed. Teresa herself had been a nun when she received this vision. She had prayed, tended Mass, kept the rule of her order, and yet she needed a radical conversion. Her holiness developed not from her status, but from her surrender. She emphasized repeatedly that no earthly suffering, none, is worth comparing to the suffering of hell. If one truly understood what hell is, one would endure anything to avoid it. Her vision reframed her entire life, reshaped her purpose, redirected her energy, and ignited reforms that would influence millions across history. She insisted that as long as one lives, mercy remains possible. Grace remains available. Conversion remains open. No one is beyond the reach of God as long as they breathe. She understood intimately that she herself had been saved from the fate she deserved, not because of her merits, but because God intervened with overwhelming mercy. For 1 hour, Teresa was in hell. When she returned, her mission became clear: reform her order, awaken the lukewarm, and bring souls back from the brink of eternal loss. Her voice, sharpened by the fire of that vision, continues to speak with the same urgency and the same piercing clarity. In the end, her journey was not just about witnessing the unseen. It was about discovering the unshakable truth that God never abandons the soul that seeks him. Every trial she faced, every shadow she encountered, and every whisper of fear that tried to silence her, all became stepping stones that led her closer to divine light. Her experience reminds us that the spiritual world is real, but so is the protection, mercy, and love that heaven pours upon those who call upon God with a sincere heart. No darkness is too strong, no fear too deep, and no burden too heavy when we walk with faith. Just as she found courage in God's presence, we too can rise above our struggles, trusting that every moment of pain can become a doorway to grace. Her story is a testament that miracles still happen, angels still protect, and God still speaks, if only we choose to listen. Let this story awaken your spirit. Let it strengthen your faith. Let it remind you that you are never alone, not for a single heartbeat. When you stand in the light, no darkness can overpower you. Walk with God, trust his timing, embrace his protection, and let your life become a beacon of hope for others. Because the greatest miracle begins the moment you believe.